Good afternoon. My name is Manoj Swaminathan. I actually run the supply chain management as well as the manufacturing aspects, basically the operations part of Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. So what I have here today is to actually go through all the aspects of the investments at what we have been doing. There's actually a session that you may have attended today that talked about the optimizations that we're doing around the warehouse and the inventory aspects of it. It was supposed to be a session that should have happened after this, but unfortunately that was scheduled before, so you may have seen that one. But bar that, all the other sessions are going to be following this session, so you would have a glimpse of all the different kinds of investments that we are doing around the supply chain, and towards the end, then I'm calling out some of those breakouts that you can attend as well to go do a deep dive on those. So this session, I've kept it in such a way so that this kind of gives you an introduction on all the different investment areas in terms of what we are doing, so that there's plenty of opportunities for us to interact and then ask questions and stuff. I'm happy to answer anything around the supply chain and the manufacturing aspects that is of your interest. So just a show of hands, partners in the room. Wow. So customers? Awesome. How many of you are already running 10.0 plus? That's awesome. That's good. So some of these, so that means you're already in the know, or you're sort of experiencing as we go. So that's actually goodness. So let's jump right in terms of what we are doing with regards to the supply chain, right? So we're actually seeing significant sort of disruption when it comes to supply chain, and it's specifically around customers wanting to actually go through the transformations within their business, if you were to. And specifically when I talk about supply chain disruptions, right? So things that used to be, or things that can be done overnight type things, are not something that we can live with as an overnight or a weekend type set of activities, if you were to. There's more and more sort of connected systems, there's more and more sort of needs around learning based off of the data in terms of to actually optimize the production operations or optimize the planning aspects of things, etc. So that's what we are really seeing as disruptions within the supply chain, and there are some of those problems. If you take the warehouse aspects of it, if you take the planning, the forecasting aspects of it, if you take the production and the scheduling, considering all the aspects of the resources, if you were to, etc., right? So those are fairly complex problems that what you do deal with day in, day out, if you were to, with the expectation that if the system were to kind of go in and help you with some of those decisions, right? Those are kind of the themes or the set of things is what we're focusing on from an investment perspective that really helps you with this disruption. So this is something that you're all quite familiar with by now. You've seen different flavors of this. So this is basically the theme by which that drives us, kind of the investments that we were to. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the optimized operations, which is basically the blade that I'm responsible for a good portion of what it is. And if you drill into what those optimized operations, right? So specifically, 3 pillars within those optimized operations is what this session is going to be. The supply chain aspects of it in its entirety, that basically means right from the product information management, inventory aspects of it, how you can optimally manage the inventory aspects of it in assisting your sales and the procurement sort of scenarios, if you were to. So that exposed with a level of collaboration with your suppliers. So that's all aspects of supply chain along with planning. And then if you extend that with manufacturing set of capabilities, if you are a manufacturer, so all of those supply chain in conjunction with you actually managing your production shop floor aspects of things, and hence the related production planning, the scheduling aspects around those. But you also do have machines that helps you to make whatever that you're manufacturing. So there's a whole bunch of initiatives that we are doing around in terms of how you can actually do your assets management aspects. So that's a major investment that we'll talk about as well as we go through in the today's discussion. The last but not the least is specifically that you as a customer could be a distributor, and if you do, the fulfillment aspects of things in terms of managing your outbound logistics, inbound logistics, and the inventory just within the warehouse and the distribution is a fundamental capability that we're focusing on There's a lot of investments around those. So those are the three pillars of investments, if you were to, in terms of what we're going to be talking about from the optimized operations or the supply chain aspects of things. So this is something that which I have presented like numerous times in terms of what our core focus themes are from an investment perspective. They have not changed. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a quick refresher on what we are using as a means or themes in terms of what we are investing. So the fundamentals forms the core set of things in terms of what we think about from an investment perspective. So that's everything that what you would expect in terms of you trusting us to run your basically business using the software that what we provide in the cloud solution, as a cloud solution that what we offer. So all the pillars that what you see around those fundamentals are obviously important to you. So that forms a major investment in terms of what we're doing. The next three pillars are basically the core capabilities. So think of them as features that what we provide out of the box using the R&D set of investments. That what we do, the connected processes are basically all the investments towards any solution that comes out of Microsoft comes out as fully integrated as opposed to you having to manually wire them if you were to. So those are the investments that what we're doing around connected processes if you were to. And the last but not the least is the intelligence and the insights. So this is us, leveraging the data in its entirety across the Dynamics 365 footprint in terms of actually leveraging everything that what we are offering to infuse AI and the ML capabilities across the board. So whether you start from the product information management, sales or procurement aspects of it, you actually don't have to go outside of the system. The system will basically leverage the data to give you insights if you were to. So that's the kind of investment that what we're doing. Those are the four pillars of investments in terms of what we're doing. You guys with me so far? Good? So we'll start getting into each of those set of capabilities. So if you look at the release notes that what we have published, I know how many of you have actually looked at the October wave of release that what we have actually published? Few hands. So this just literally got released today, so you don't have to feel bad about it if you didn't look at it. So it's fine. There's over if you have seen the Muhammad session, we talked about more than 180 plus set of feature capabilities that we're putting. Over 100 of those are predominantly from the supply chain manufacturing aspects of it if we were to, right? So we're not going to go through every one of those investments as part of this session. So but what we would be doing is there's what I call as sort of key initiatives that what we are investing. So we'll go through those as part of this session, as well as I'll touch upon the other areas as what we are investing. And we can discuss about any of those in detail that where you guys would want to spend time. So I'll start with the planning optimization. So this is something that if you had seen my presentations or some of the other team members' presentation, we used to call this planning as a service, which is what we're officially branding as planning optimizations. And I'll talk about why we're calling this planning optimization as well. But what is planning optimization is, right? So this is master planning capability that what we have today in the product. So master planning, as you all know, is actually a batch process. And for the most part, customers use this as a distributor or as a retailer or as a manufacturer to actually go in and do your planned purchase requirements or planned transfer requirements or planned production requirements depending on what you actually do. So this is all great from the perspective in terms of its capability if you were to, but there were significant challenges because the planning with it being a batch process, for the most part, customers do run them as an overnight job. And there are very complex set of customer scenarios that what we are aware of where they're actually running this over the weekend. There are extreme situations where customers are running this only once a month. And it is fairly, and it is probably one of the most data intensive set of operations depending on the combinations that you could possibly be running planning in our system today. And in a way, as how it's actually designed, it is only optimized for an overnight set of requirement. But what we see when I talked about the disruption, right? Whether you talk about a retailer, whether you talk about a distributor, there's a significant requirement around being able to react fairly quickly. Right, so how many of you have seen the Avengers Endgame? So this is the mantra in terms of what it is that is expected around the disruption if you were to. So the people who have seen this would understand that, right? So I think that's really the requirement in terms of being able to do real-time planning if you were to. And we've imagined this in a slightly different as a component outside of finance and operations. So that's why you see the planning optimization service sitting outside of finance and operations. So net what it is it's its own multi-tenant, a scalable in-memory based service that runs alongside with finance and operations. So when you spawn the planning, it wouldn't run as a batch service anymore. This would actually run the planning with the task that is sent as a request to the planning optimization service, which does all its work based on the requirement and sends the results back to finance and operations. So where a planning persona can see the planned order results or the transfer order results or the production results, not yet. And then they can, if they find it good, they can firm it, and if they don't find it good, they can basically go in and resubmit them. So the couple of goodness with this thing, which is one, we're no more consuming the resources within the finance and operations, which is fundamentally key, so that you can actually don't have to do this as an overnight job. You can actually do this during the daytime in itself if you were to. The second thing in this is geared towards an in-memory set of things and not as the traditional SQL-intensive, data-intensive set of bad jobs as what it used to be. So as a result, you can actually run this as many times as you would want to get real-time results. And when I talk about real-time, this is really, really real-time from the perspective that what used to take 4 to 6 hours, we're actually doing this in the order of 2 to 3 minutes. Right, so some things that used to be a weekend set of activities, we're doing it in less than 10 minutes if you were to. So that's the shift in terms of what we've been able to accomplish with the planning optimization service. We did enable this capability starting from the April release as a controlled preview, and that is something that we're going to make it broadly available starting from July as well. That's why you see the 2 green boxes on the right. That's basically distribution requirements as well as the retail. So it's basically targeting those true set of industries if you were to, and if you are a manufacturer, we're going to provide that capability starting from October. So that's the first in the series of a major investment that what we have been doing. And if you are looking to actually go deeper into this, stay in this room. We're going to have a next session that's focused on the planning optimization service in itself as an entirety. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. I'll take you through in terms of more detailed demos, as well as what the experience is going to look like across the board from a planning optimization service standpoint. So that's planning optimization. The second one is, many of you would have read the blog post that Mohammed posted. So this is about the enterprise asset management space investment that what we have done. So we actually made an acquisition through a partner acquisition from Dynaway around getting the basic set of capabilities around the enterprise asset management. So that's basically what is branded as asset management going forward if you were to. So this is another major initiative that what we've actually done. So many of you would have been familiar with the acquisition itself, but this is an update in terms of what we have been doing and what's going to come around in this space if you were to. So the asset management in itself in terms of what we acquired brings you these capabilities if you were to, right? So a little bit more detailed set of view, which I'll present it in a bit, right? So I think if you look at it in a way as how we are thinking about. So these capabilities that what you see from an acquisition standpoint, we actually do support a good portion of this through our fixed asset set of capabilities as part of financials. So there's a notion of how you can actually get an asset, install it, and then do the aspects around the procurement aspects, the payment aspects of things, etc., is something that we've always been supporting as part of the product. So where we had the major gap was primarily around the manage, maintain aspects of things. So that was predominantly the space that the enterprise asset management really fills in, if you were to. So when you talk about the manage aspects of things, right, so right from the definition aspects of what are your assets, what are the hierarchies of those assets, if you were to, and what aspects of it that you need to think about. So these are everything about the physical aspects of the assets, right? So that's really what it is that we would now be able to actually support and track as part of this. And part of management includes knowing what is required for you to be able to actually maintain. So this is about anything that you have as assets that you are responsible for maintaining within your own organization. So what do you need to manage this? So this could be an aspects of the spares that you would need to manage if you were to, or any kind of maintenance that you need to actually go in and do. And these maintenance basically is, right, so these are machines that are installed in your facility, or these can be machined installed at some other location that which you service. So this could be like, a loaned assets, or this could be rented assets, or this could be assets installed at your customer sites if you were to, right? So there's an aspect of how you want to actually go about managing those from a maintenance standpoint. So what do we mean by this is, what we acquired gives us what we call as the reactive maintenance. It basically means you would manually track the usage of how much the assets have been used. There's set of manuals or instructions that are coming through the asset manufacturer that basically says, if you use this for 2 months, not necessarily knowing and what you did with those in those 2 months, if you use this for 2 months, you probably need to do a scheduled maintenance type stuff. So you can basically go in and track and then do the reactive maintenance if you were to, but there are gaps around those in terms of what you might experience. And what do I mean by this is, let's say you do have to maintain and you bring down the machine for maintenance. So what happens to everything that's planned around your solution today in terms of you trying to consume or use that machine for your production? Are you going to be able to go in and do that? Or what's the impact of you bringing the machine down, right? So those aspects were not that obvious through the reactive maintenance if you were to. So we're infusing IoT capabilities as well as out of the box. So what that means is you would now be able to actually understand the usage of those assets in real time. This could be the machine's usage, this could be consumption based, this could be tools usage if you were to, and those would be factored in, and you can actually have thresholds that controls the maintenance requirements. So this leads towards predictive and preventive maintenance set of capabilities. So those are net new set of things that what we are adding to the asset management if you were to, in terms of enabling you to be able to do a bit more set of things rather than just doing the reactive maintenance aspects of it. So that's something that we would be enabling. The next series of things that what you will actually see is as you being the a production persona, you would actually have full visibility of the resources availability, and your production plans, if you were to, that takes into account for those resources availability and schedules the jobs for the production planning, will now be able to factor in the maintenance requirements. So this is the connected processes that I talked about. So the asset management will interact with the planning service so that it would know as part of the manufacturing planning to say which resources are available, and it will give you the job scheduling based off of those. So that's something that you will actually see as out of the box with the asset management brought in. The third interesting thing that what I wanted to highlight as part of this is we're infusing not just the IoT capabilities as part of this, we're also infusing the mixed reality aspects of it if you were to. So for example, when you look at checklists or faults as capabilities in those, so as a maintenance persona, as a maintenance supervisor, you walk into each of those assets as part of your shop floor or any of those facility where you have those assets installed. you can actually go in and look at, as a supervisor, what are the expected set of things that you need to be looking for as a checklist. And we will actually provide guides, experiences out of the box, so that you can actually decide and you can actually understand how you need to be performing those checklists if you were to, and you have an ability to be able to have those marked and tracked as part of the maintenance activity that you do. Tied to every one of those fault, which is basically the repairs or the maintenance that what you need to be doing, we will have the ability for you to be able to associate guides as well. So what this enables is the maintenance persona to be able to actually go see what the fault is, and for tied to each of those faults, what they actually have to go do in terms of managing those if you were to. So there's mixed reality set of infusions that what we are introducing as an out of the box. So the net set of things is what it is that I wanted to highlight is, right, so this will completely integrate with financials for you to be able to track the asset management aspects of the costs in its entirety, and then we would actually provide you with intelligence around those as well. So net, so this is not going to be the grandfather times of enterprise asset management. So we're trying to actually give you the latest set of things infused as part of this, like the IoT infusion, mixed reality infusion, the more real-time set of things, as well as this having an ability to have a fully connected experience within your ERP, as well as the customer engagement suites. So when I talk about the customer engagement, just to kind of give you the glimpse of the integration, right? So you could basically have the assets installed within your organization, for which you have your maintenance persons doing the maintenance and the management of those. But if you have the assets installed at somewhere else, right, so you can actually use field services out of the box as well. So the field services capability will be integrated, and if you have specific field service persona that is meant to go and manage those assets, you would be able to actually go use the resource scheduler out of the box as well, to be able to understand the field service persona's availability and the need for what is required, and then to go in and do those. The spares that the field service persona needs is also something that you will be able to plan, and if you produce those spares for yourself, that will be factored in as part of the production. If you need to go buy, you will be able to do the planned purchase orders for those spares as well. So that's another means by which the planning is integrated as part of this. So that's in itself in terms of how we are bringing in or infusing the asset management set of capabilities that what we have acquired, plus enabling a lot more set of capabilities out of the box. This will also have not just the F&O set of web-based experience, but this will also have mobile experience for both the supervisor scenarios in-house, as well as the field service personas in terms of any of those externally located assets, for them to be able to manage the work order requests, the work order life cycles in its entirety, as well as derive analytics out of the work that what they have done, as well as track the availability of the parts that they need to be able to go do the maintenance. So that's what we're actually doing with regards to the asset management. So just in terms of the important question that would be in your minds, which is when can I see this and what can I do with this, right? So I think so the what should be clear. So when is this is actually in a managed preview right now. So basically means you have to reach out to us and we would give you access. So we have started that starting from middle of April, and we intend to actually make this broadly available starting from beginning of July. So that's when we're going to make this public preview, and then this would be available as part of the standard product starting from the October 1st release that what we would be doing. So this would be something that you would be able to see from then on. Make sense? Good. So the next one that I wanted to quickly touch upon is the advanced warehouse and the transportation management aspects of things. So this is another capability that what we have acquired through our partner as well, with Blue Horseshoe, as well as another partner, Fullscope, which is now called Alithya, around the catch weight set of capabilities, as well as a whole slew of warehouse and the transportation management set of capabilities. We made the catch weights available starting from the April, and we're continuing to invest and enhance in those if you were to. But then since then, we've also been integrating the warehouse and the transportation management aspects of things as well. So these are in its entirety in terms of the features that what we plan to go in and do with regards to the warehouse and the transportation management, if you were to, without talking about the catch weight capability, right? So there's about 30 or so set of features that what we are trying to bring in as part of the standard product that predominantly controls in a very good way a rich set of capabilities for you to manage your outbound logistics, a very good set of things around in its entirety in terms of you being able to manage. So everything that you see on the top as horizontal, so they basically apply to all three factors if you were to, but then the other focused ones are inbound logistics, outbound logistics, and the inventory aspects tied to the warehouse if you were to. So these are the capabilities that what we intend to launch as part of the October as well, in terms of, and there's a good set of features that have already been in the mode of flighting, and these are some things that which you may have experienced already, if not, something that I want to bring your attention as well. So tied to each of those 10.x releases, we have been bringing in these capabilities, and these have been flighted. So I'm sure you're all aware of what flighting is, and then how to enable those if you were to. So we have been flighting these sets of features specifically. So there's one session that we did already that talked about some of these feature capabilities, specifically around more on the fundamentals aspects of it, in terms of how we are actually improving the performance and a whole set of things. And there is one more session that we have tomorrow that's going to go into deep on every one of these in terms of how these features enable or enrich the whole warehouse and the transportation aspects of things. But its entirety in terms of all of those 30 odd set of features that are what I brought up in the previous slide, you will be able to see them starting from the October. Anybody in this room who already tried some of these features? Good. So IoT intelligence is the other aspect of the investment that what we have been doing. So this is what have been branded, or you would have seen us talk about as connected manufacturing. So that's basically what this is. But it has extended beyond the manufacturing aspects if we were to. And a reason for this is we're bringing in the IoT capabilities natively as part of finance and operations, but just not limited to the manufacturing aspects alone. But it's also included as part of the asset management set of capabilities. But you will see us integrate IoT capabilities into the broader supply chain ecosystem if you were to. For example, you would see us integrate in the warehouse, you would see us integrated in the transportation aspects of things, and just not limited to the production. So that's why the names IoT intelligence basically gives you the infused capabilities of IoT within finance and operations, as well as deriving intelligence based on the signals. So this is where our life cycle started if you were to, and this is the capability that what we have as part of a control preview right now. So this predominantly talks about three things, that is production, quality, and the asset management aspects of things. So when I talk about the production specifically, right, so you have machines that are taking in parts and then producing some sort of output if you were to. It can be a semi-finished one, or it can be the final product depending on what you are manufacturing. So that aspect of it, for you to be able to actually track the part in, part out, sort of affect the production rates as well as the throughput of your production type stuff as an out-of-the-box capability, something that we would be able to do. And as you produce those parts out, is the quality coming out to be as exactly as what you wanted? So the quality aspects of it, and we have customers trying this out already on these three vectors if you were to, right? So this is the capability that what we have as a preview right now. But what we are working on, and something that you will actually see us starting with the October, is the additional capabilities around the asset management in Fusion, the additional capabilities around the inventory updates aspects of things are going to be natively factored in as part of the product. And it doesn't stop right there. We're going to actually give you an onboarding experience as well, and that is something that you would have seen as part of the James's keynote, as well as we're going to have a focus session tomorrow in the morning first thing to go through this in detail, where we'll actually walk you through the full end-to-end experience of how we can onboard to any of these scenarios, as well as how you can actually use the workspaces that what we are providing. So in a nutshell, if you were to, right, if you have tried to go in and use the IoT capabilities, that's what the picture is actually trying to show you. If you were to try and do this thing today, the most simplest flow that what you could do is you would have machines in your shop floor or in your facility that has sensors wired in. And those sensors data would go into your own facility as wherever you are to those local servers, from which you would stream them to any IoT hub. And here I am showing you the Azure IoT hub if you were to. And that would have an ability to be able to take that signals data in real time to do analysis and give you information or insights about those on top of those if you were. So what we have done is we've actually optimized that with an interim component called IoT Intelligence Service. So what this service does is it gives you the rich set of capabilities of what you are tracking as resources, the usage of those resources from within the ERP infused with the signals from the IoT. That is all mashed in the IoT Intelligence Service for us to be able to give you some real-time view of how it's being used. You can actually define thresholds to get alerts if you were to. You can also, based off of those alerts, you can have the system recommend actions, and you can take those actions right from within those workspaces if you were to. A typical experience for a customer in this journey, if you do this outside today, is a significantly large project. So one of the things that we're trying to simplify is that we actually really want to actually have a very easy onboarding experience. So all we are expecting you is, which is only the first two boxes that you see on, if you are looking at it from your left to right, the first two boxes, which is basically your facility having machines wired with the IoT sensors. They may already have them, or you may be wiring them as part of this effort if you were to, as well as your own IoT hub, to basically get the data ingested. So from then on, the life cycle of this is something that we would be able to take in inferring the signals data, combining that with the ERP data to understand how it's being used, and based off of the rules that you've defined, as meaningful as it is for your business, we would apply those in real time and give you the insights, alerts, actions that you can possibly take right from within the experience. So that onboarding is something that which we have not done, and that's why it was a more or less a managed preview when we did release this in April. We have few customers who are trying this today using the managed preview specifically for those production scenarios as well as this. So one of the questions that I get in common whenever I talk about this is, right, so is this going to substitute the MES capabilities? Are you going to target the MES behaviors if you were to, right? So this is the starting if you were to, from an MES aspects in terms of us being able to actually support every aspects of the production and every aspect of the quality aspects that what you are able to actually go do from the manufacturing standpoint. So there's an aspect that which we don't intend to actually go in and do, which is today there are certain MES systems that actually take in, depending on the type of the machines, it actually does take in the machine's instructions. It can be a CNC, then based on the job you can actually feed the actual instructions that it needs to process for a particular time based on what it's expected to go do. That's an aspect that we're not going to go in and do, but everything else around those in terms of the production throughput, the production effectiveness, if you were to, in terms of the production rates, the quality aspects of things, all the analytics around the plan to the actuals, if you were to, both in terms of the real time as well as the trend aspects of things, the seasonality and the anomalies around those from a production standpoint. Those we would provide out of the box, conforming to the OEE standards. So you do not have to actually go outside of this system to go in and get those information going forward. So OEE is a fairly well-known standard that everybody is trying to adapt to, and that's something that we would provide out of the box. And we would have both from a real-time standpoint for the shop floor supervisor, as well as both the person standing in front of every one of those workstations, as well as the supervisor who's walking into the shop floors, will actually have a new workspace that provides a much more sort of enrichment in getting real-time signals view if you were to, as well as the onboarding experience plus the analytics across various levels of individuals within your organization, measuring the production effectiveness and the efficiencies. So that's what we are focusing on from the IoT intelligence standpoint. Plus, this would be integrated with the asset management as well. So that basically means you would be able to track the assets usage in its entirety as well through the IoT signals. So like I said, we released this as a more managed control preview starting from April. So this is something that we intend to actually make it broadly available starting from the October as well. So if you are working with a customer, or if you are interested in as a customer, being part of this effort, please let me know, and I'm happy to actually onboard you guys from this. And we would be able to do more broader onboarding starting from July as well, in a similar way like the asset management set of capabilities. So that's what is the focus in terms of the IoT intelligence and in terms of where we are and what we are doing. What it will also have is, if you see on the right side, specifically I've called out around the notification action services, inventory update action services. And when you see the session tomorrow when we walk you through, where we will do a deep dive on this, you will actually see the onboarding experience really enabling each of those as organizations wanting to use each of those scenarios. You would be able to onboard the selective one for a particular your instance in terms of which one is of interest to you. We'll also have a custom action service, right? So that basically means it's just not limited to what we're offering, so you would be able to extend this as well. So to be able to actually go in and look at a specific signal that we didn't look at, but that might be of interest or relevance to your business, you would be able to go in and do those as well. So that's something that you should expect, and that's something that we're providing out of the box as well as part of this. So the additional set of investments that I wanted to quickly touch upon, right? So everything that I talked about is some of the key initiatives. So these are the other areas that what we are investing in terms of that adds up to those 100 plus set of features that what we're landing in from the October standpoint, right? So there's a bunch of things that what we are doing around the product information management that we're trying to focus on, and that's predominantly around sharing of the product's information, right? So I think this is a problem that you're all quite familiar with. When we did enable the sharing coming from the previous releases, we used to have virtual company-based capability that you're all familiar with, and we didn't have the virtual company capabilities, but we did what we call as data replication basis of sharing, but we enabled those data replication based stuff of sharing only for few sets of things like setup and configuration type data. But when it comes to the master data, things like customers and vendors, we've limited it to only up to certain number of records, and if you go beyond, we said you wouldn't be able to actually go in and use those. So that's a major area that what we are investing in, specifically around doing more common record sharing aspects for aspects like products from within this. So that's something that you will actually see. Within the sales and the procurement standpoint, there's a good number of features that what we're enabling in the context of, so for example, evaluated receipt settlement is one of the most commonly asked feature. Like this is basically as soon as you receive, and if everything is good, you want to be able to actually pay the supplier instead of waiting for the invoice to come in. and for that to be paid. So it's one of the most commonly asked set of capabilities. We're trying to infuse those as part of the product. So there's a bunch of requirements around, depending on what aspects of the products that you are shipping and managing. Like if you are dealing with hazardous set of materials, the necessary set of documentation that you need to go in and do. So those were not part of the standard capability. We're bringing those as part of the October release, if you were to. So there's a whole set of features that what we're introducing around sales and procurement that includes the vendor portal set of enhancements as well. And specifically to talk about the vendor portal, where the life cycle that we've been focusing on is once we have the purchase order and then on is really what we have been focusing on, but that is not really good when it comes to the vendor portal. So we are trying to actually backtrack a little bit to bring that vendor portal usage a little bit earlier in the life cycle as well. So what that means is we're investing in adding the RFQ, RFI set of capabilities, if you were to, as part of the portals. So that enables both the sourcing aspects of things, but also in situations very specifically with public sector type set of organizations, where when you are doing bidding type set of processes, you would now be able to support not just bidding management, but also to be able to actually do seal bids as out of the box set of capability. So we did originally wanted to go in and do this, and we've done everything, but then we had to actually take into account a good set of security requirements as well around the bid management. So that's the reason as why that capability had stalled, and that's something that we are bringing in as part of this release as well. Around inventory and costing, we're actually doing major set of investment. That's something that you would see starting from October. Is around two things. So one is the inventory visibility aspects is quite a painful set of things depending on where and how you are trying to access inventory. It's a problem that should resonate in folks in this room quite well. There's an on-hand form that's predominantly or mostly used set of capability, if you were to, but then there's inventory availability checks from within the application logic that's used throughout in terms of, and then there's behaviors like, for example, within point of sale or within the other channels that what we support, there's need to actually get the inventory information in real time. This in and itself is a capability that's not optimized within finance and operations is what we are. So we're investing in bringing in a similar capability like the planning optimization service. So bringing in inventory as a service in and itself. So what that would enable you is, it is a microservice by itself that allows you to actually get API-based access to get real-time inventory information across any channel. So specifically with us investing a lot around the commerce capability, with us seeing a significant requirement around multiple channels requiring real-time inventory information. So that's a capability that we would be able to provide. Very important, it will give you cross-org inventory view as well. And that's something that we have heard over and over and over again. So that's something that we would address as part of this capability, right? That's something that you would actually see starting with this release. Around the costing aspects of things, so this problem should also be familiar to most of you in this room. So when we do inventory cost evaluation aspects of things, we only support one method of evaluation associated to the product. We don't support more than one, and if you do need to, you have to actually go do another implementation with all kinds of magic with the posting groups and stuff that which you have to go do, which is not a trivial effort. So basic things like, I need to do standard cost for my statutory, but I also need to do moving average for my management purposes. You just cannot do that simply in the system today, right? So that's a capability that what we are bringing in. So extending the same setup that what we have done, we're introducing the notion of an accounting method with the ledger definition that allows you to actually say, you can actually have one or more methods, and you can define policies and rules around those. And using those, we would be able to do the accounting not just on the primary, but also on every one of those secondaries as well. So that's a capability that you would see. There's significant focus around the distribution. We'll do the Q&A in a bit. Yeah, we'll do a Q&A in a bit. Yes. So we're doing a set of things around the distributions focus, specifically in terms of enabling high volume sales management, if you were to, and then extending that to the warehouse. So think of that as every aspect of a distributor needing to be able to scale to a very large set of distributors' requirements. So that's a focus in terms of what that is. So right from sales orders to the fulfillment aspects through the warehouse, if you were to. Our goal with this is to actually work towards scaling for 100x. So if you attended some of the inventory work and the warehouse, there are changes that what we have been doing. So this has been the focus, if you were to. So that's something that you would see as, so there's a whole set of features that's coming in around that. The manufacturing focus is outside of the IoT intelligent stuff that I talked about. We're enhancing our job card terminal type set of experiences. So that brings you a bit more set of things around how do you actually manage the production experiences, how do you actually manage the reasoning aspects of things around those, as the personas using those experiences would be able to track and manage and gain intelligence based off of what they've been able to actually go do. The last but not the least is something that I get quite frequently asked about. Say, hey, there is vendor portal and I don't have customer portal that was there before. So that's an area in terms of what we are investing, and you should look at, if you haven't already, so there should be a Power Portal session as well as part of the Business Application Summit. If you haven't looked at it, I would highly encourage you to actually go in and look at. So that's the basis by which we're doing these portal investments as well. So what does that mean is, we would have an out-of-the-box site or a portal experience that would target both the customers as well as the vendors going forward, leveraging the Power Portal experience, as opposed to the FNO based ones, which is actually quite tedious to use, as well as some of you may have experienced in terms of how to figure out the usage, the licensing aspects of things as well. So that's something that we're able to actually address with this as well. So portals is another major investment that what we are doing, and you would see us starting to light up as part of the October as well. CDS integration is something that you would have heard us talk a lot, but if not, I would highly encourage you to go do. But what this is accruing FNO's data in CDS real time, right? So this is not the order to cash or the prospect to cash or the field services to finance and operations integration, which is also there, but they give you the capability of you being able to synchronize information in a more asynchronous way as opposed to real time. But this is as part of the transaction itself. That means whether you create the information in finance and operations, you would be able to realize that data in CDS as part of the same transaction scope itself, using a capability with the data integrator called Dual Write. And this has been in preview since October, the data integrator's Dual Write capability, but we have been investing significantly in this. And this is something that you would see. So what you should expect from us, at least from the supply chain standpoint, is right from the product information management, the sales, procurement, the inventory, the asset management workloads, as well as the warehouse aspects of things. The tier one set of information is something that you would see us realize in CDS starting with the October release. So that's what you should expect. So what this really enables is, this enables you to be able to actually be able to build experiences both as Power BI experiences, Power App experiences, or having to interact with events, with flows, if you were to, in real time directly off of CDS, as opposed to you building all of those, if you were to. So we're not re-platforming, we're not throwing away finance and operations database. So that should not be the takeaway, but it enables for us to be able to actually build more set of capabilities. So that's something. So we have a dedicated session that talks about the CDS integrations in its entirety, and you would be able to actually see the demo of what we have done with regards to in terms of enriching the product schema and a bunch more, if you were to as part of the experience this time around, if you are attending that session. I touched upon as part of the disruption in about AI and the ML infused capability. So this is something that you would see us invest significantly. So the first in the series that you would see us do is around suppliers, procurement, and the inventory are the three areas that we're enabling ML capabilities, and you will see us invest in the planning aspects as well, specifically around the demand forecasting or the demand planning scenario is really where we are infusing a much richer set of out-of-the-box ML capabilities, if you were to. The last but not the least is focus on the business continuity and significant investments around the performance across the board. The business continuity aspects of it is we're looking at offline capabilities specifically for the warehouse management aspects as well as the production capability, if you were to. So along the similar lines as how retail supports point of sale being in the offline mode, so we're now looking to actually enable those. So these are something that you would see towards the end of the calendar year type things, if you were to, in terms of what we are investing. So that's in a nutshell in terms of the additional investments that what we are doing, and you would see us bring more of these capabilities to light as month over month, if you were to. So that's a set of things. So these are some of the recommended sessions outside of the CDS type stuff that which I talked about. So between right after this session, that's planning optimization 1, and then the rest are mostly tomorrow, if you were to. So that's, if you have not looked at, sorry, if you guys were taking pictures, if you have not looked at, I would highly encourage you to actually go in and look at the release notes aspects of it, which talks about every one of those capability which just got published literally today. So I would highly encourage you to actually go read those, and please feel free to reach out to me if there's specific questions that you have about those features that you see, as well as any of those aspects that which I touched upon that you would like to be part of the preview, or you would like to get some early access to some of these. Please do reach out to me as well. So with that, I'll open it up for Q&A. Please go ahead. Measure what? Yeah, so the question was, if I got this right, so along with the IoT intelligence, is there plans to actually do that supporting the retail scenarios in terms of this? So without stealing the thunder for some of the retail folks, there should be discussions about those if there's a retail general session that somewhat of a similar mode like what we are doing on the supply chain. But the short answer to this is yes. But in a way, as how we are thinking about it, it's not necessarily from an IoT perspective. You will actually see that with what we refer to as mixed reality infusion. So that would be like using the camera feeds type stuff that allows us to actually get what we call as the perception aspects of things, right? So that's the areas where we are investing, and you would see us announce more around those as well as we go through. Not specifically on the IoT signals per se in terms of having those in the doors type stuff, but it's more around understanding the perceptions and the signals based off of how people are leveraging the space in terms of what gets done, and then use that to determine in terms of, and you would see us do the same on the warehouse side of things as well. Please. It's a beautiful question. So I think I touched upon the connected processes. So that's a theme that we strive towards in terms of making sure. So the question was, with the asset management capabilities of bringing in, would that be integrated with the fixed assets? The answer to that is yes, we would actually go in and do this. And in a way as how we're actually rationalizing the object hierarchies today in a way as how it is maintained in the enterprise asset management with the fixed assets in terms of, and we are seeing that it's one-to-one in some cases and it's not one-to-one in some cases. If you were to, so we would give you an ability for you to be able to map those so that you would have the financial view of the assets, something that you're able to correlate with the asset management that you're doing with the physical world. So if you have many of those that are mapped to one, you would be able to actually go in and track them so that you can unambiguously get the costs and the financial aspects of things going forward. So that's a way as how we are thinking about. Good question. Yep. So there's so the question is, if you didn't get that question, the question is with the asset management, what are we doing with regards to the mobility aspects of things, and what technology are we doing this? So just as a background, right? So the acquisition that we did not get the mobile aspects of things because of the platform reasons specifically, but we're bringing in the mobility aspects out of the box. So you would see us do this in two forms, if you were to. But the broader answer is, this would be with the Power Platform ecosystem, if you were to, including the offline capability through the Power Platform in terms of what it is. So this would be a managed app experience with the Power App. So that's what you would expect. And I said about two steps to that, and the reason for that is because there are some capabilities that we are working with the Power Platform itself, so that we could actually get the full enriched set of behaviors as what we need with regards to the mobility aspect. In the interim, if there is some customer who really needs this right now, per se, we would actually have the F&O mobility experience with the offline as well in the interim. But our target is to actually provide the Power Platform basis, and that would be as a managed app with the offline enabled. That's what you would see. Please.
Two questions that kind of build on each other. The first would be asset management. We're kind of focusing on that being about assets that are in a factory or maybe delivery trucks, things like that. But there are several clients we have that have assets that are actually at customer facilities.
Yep.
Do you envision this being able to be used for that, kind of like the vendor customer facility, kind of for the asset? Do you see that as part of this?
Yeah, so that's what I talked about during the asset management discussion. So for the broader audience, the question is, so we have asset management supporting assets within the organization's facility or the premises, if you were to, but there are clients who have their assets placed externally as well, and would this be able to support those capabilities if you were to? So you, as an implementing organization, you would be able to do the asset management for all the assets if you were to. But that being said, right, the management aspects of it, that's where the field services integration really comes into play. And today, that's the space that what the field services really helps from an operational perspective, to manage the assets located elsewhere with the service personnel deployed to go manage the maintenance aspects of things like this. So this is something that organizations farmed out to the, the asset management corporations to do this as a third-party maintenance, if you were to, or they have their own field services wing, or the people who go in and do this. So our integration will help you to actually go in and manage them through that. So that basically means assets deployed externally, you would be able to manage. So the field services also has the IoT capabilities that we talked about. So you would be able to understand the usage and then do the maintenance aspects of things. The work order concepts will be synchronized. So you would now be able to, without any ambiguity, be able to understand the work orders in this to be also something that you would be able to use as a field services. So nothing stops from a deploying organization using asset management to go use field services for their own as well as for the external. But if they choose to use just asset management for the internal, but then to use field services for the external, both modes will be supported out of the box. So the question to add on to that is that some of them are at an external location as revenue generating assets. That basically means these are loaned assets, rented assets type stuff, so that which could go through standard billing and stuff. So revenue management is its own investment that we have done with this. That integration is not yet there, at least from the October standpoint, but you should expect that to be the post-October set of things. But yes, we will do that. Yeah, very good question. Yep. Which are those two features?
The planning and what you mentioned about the on-hand as a service.
Wow. Wow. No, it's a good question. It's a good question, right? I think the short answer is where we stand today. Not yet. Not yet. But that being said, right, I think it should not be taken as something that we will not support, right? And the reason as why I'm saying this is because attend the planning session right after this session. Please do. And I will talk about what we are envisioning from the planning optimization perspective. It is not as simple as an API that you could provide, and that's the reason as why it is. And our intent is to actually support necessary connectivity experiences so that the planning optimization can operate as a standalone service that you can feed any source's data, and you can feed in AX 2012's data, you can feed in, if you're using another ERP's data, you can actually feed that in as well, and that's how we intend to support the on-prem version as well. On the inventory as a service, it's a very different thing. It's too early for us to be able to actually go in and say, and that's another reason as why I said not yet, is because it's too early. But our goal with this is to support any channel requiring real-time inventory information, for which I don't see why. All you should expect it is an endpoint that which you can actually connect to and then get, but it'll always be a connected experience for everything. If the connected experience work for your on-prem, then this would work as well for your scenario. But the inventory information is what it would be, that would reside in the cloud, and it would basically be through the cloud. That's what you should expect to say. For the inventory piece, we haven't ironed out as what it's going to look like. For the planning stuff, we have, and that's why I said please stay through the planning so we can actually walk you through with regards to that as how we are seeing, in a way, as how we are planning on enabling those. And we have done investments around those that I would definitely talk about those. For the on-prem, on the planning, on a shorter roadmap, yes, but on the inventory service, it's too early to say as how this would be. But at a very high level, as what I know today from a design, I can tell you that this would be just like you querying another real-time RESTful. Exactly, yes. That's what it would be. Yep. Sorry, there was a question over there. So the question was for the second inventory cost model, when would that come, and then basically how would this? So this is something that you should start from the October as well. But when we launch this in the October, this would be in preview, unlike the other capabilities that I talked about as being generally available. This would be in its preview capability, and if you are interested in, please let me know, and I'll actually connect you with the respective set of things, and I'm happy to give you more details as well. But a gist of it is, today the ledger basically controls one accounting method if you were to, and then there's only one aspect that what you're able to associate with the product or the item today. We're extending that to be more than one if you were to, and we would be able to specify one as the primary, and then the other ones we would actually go in and account as part of the primary accounting in itself, using the other policies. Yes, it is brand new. Sorry, there was a question here, and then I'll come. Yep.
So you mentioned the portal templates also October.
So you will start seeing some of these portal templates light up starting from the October, yes.
Is that based on Power Portals?
Yes.
And that list of CDS data entities available, is that also in the release notes?
The entity by entity stuff, you may not see them as part of the release notes, but if it is something that we intend to actually keep revising as we go. So what you see is the first publishment of the release notes in June. This is something that we will actually revise on every month, and you will actually see more entities added to that. But if that's something that you would like to at least, but at a very high level, what you should expect is product information management, inventory, sales, procurement, and the warehouse are basically what we are targeting, along with the asset management.
Fairly broad. I mean, it's a broad list of data.
Yes. Yep. So that's what you should expect in terms of questions.
In one of your slides, you mentioned a couple of bullets from the warehouse inbound processes, where you mentioned quality control and sample handling, but it wasn't kept up further in the next ones. Could
So this is in the context of the IoT intelligence or something else that you are referring to?
Now you had a couple of bullets with the warehouse inbound processes,
Yes,
where you also have stated quality processes and sampling.
yes.
Could you elaborate about that?
So on the inbound logistics, we're actually extending, our ability to be able to actually track specifically as part of the warehouse. Like when you do get the goods in the receiving dock, you would now be able to actually track how many of those have been taken out from the quality perspective, what were the states from the quality, and how does it impact the inventory aspects of things if you were to. This was not well integrated with the warehouse processes today, and that's what you would actually see. We're not enhancing the product from the perspective of quality management per se, but this is more integrating the quality aspects with your warehouse operations. So that's what you would say.
In the app.
Sorry? In the app, yes, you would see that.